So here's the article. Star Wars fans are trying to kill Rian Johnson's new trilogy. He shot back at them on Twitter. This is an article by Matt Miller of Esquire. I think a lot of us have gotten familiar with a lot of these journalists, in inverted commas, over the last year, and they're sensationalist clickbait. And this isn't any different. It's trying to rile fans to, I don't know, to comment negatively, I guess, or to run to Rian Johnson's defence. I'm not quite sure where this Matt Miller sits in regards to whether he thinks The Last Jedi is a good movie or not. But we'll go through the article. I'll just quickly read it out. So, Star Wars fans have made the latest trilogy in the beloved sci-fi saga a living hell, to say the least. Between racist attacks and toxic fandom, the conversation surrounding the latest 3 movies in the Star Wars franchise has become a disease. Having endured the last 4 years of Star Wars trolls, it's time to prepare for whatever fresh hell awaits us. And this week we got a little look into that future. Much of the debate about Star Wars the last few years has been about Rian Johnson's second entry into the new trilogy, The Last Jedi. If you ask critics, the movie was a triumph, a much needed leap in the storytelling we typically get from Star Wars films. Depending on what fans you ask, it either supported a white genocide, or it simply destroyed their childhood and everything they hold dear. Throughout it all, Johnson has spent an entire year fighting with fans online, whom he calls man babies, and defending his film from trolls. So it's strange how no one else has had to defend their films in the Star Wars franchise before this one. I guess Abrams took a little bit of flack for The Force Awakens and its complete carbon copy retread of A New Hope. But on the whole, it was kind of accepted, that movie. But yeah, The Last Jedi is he's gotten so much hate for this film, obviously. Otherwise, people wouldn't be writing about it. That, it's pretty obvious that the movie, more or less, I think, single-handedly decimated the franchise. And kind of blew off 3 wheels and just left it crawling along on one. But there's a reason, the fact that he here says, Rian Johnson coined the phrase man babies, and that was one of the main things that upset the fan base so much, because it just went to show the lack of respect that the filmmakers have for their audience and for the fans. And there were plenty more other people like Pablo Hidalgo that came out afterwards, following in his footsteps. And we have here, despite the toxic fans, and we all know that the word toxic now means people that disagree with the way that Lucasfilm and Star Wars movies, or the franchise itself, is being run. So continuing, despite the toxic fans, Disney has entrusted Rian Johnson with the next era of Star Wars, with an entirely new trilogy that is separate from the episodic Skywalker saga and will introduce new characters from a corner of the galaxy that Star Wars lore has never before explored. Unfortunately, even though that new trilogy is years away, Johnson is already fighting with toxic Star Wars fans. Earlier this week, now deleted post on something called SuperbroMovies.com claimed that Johnson had walked away from the planned trilogy. Fan sites that have been critical of Johnson gleefully jumped all over the news, hinting that he'd quit the trilogy because of fan outrage. Well, they would. Can you blame them? Johnson then took to Twitter to dispel these rumours. And there we have the tweet. No, it isn't true. I'm still working on the trilogy. With all due respect to the movie bros, who I'm sure are lovely, kind bros with good fraternal intentions, he said in response to an article claiming he'd stepped away from the trilogy. This is just a tease of what's to come from the next trilogy in this franchise. You know it's not going to get made. Johnson is currently in post-production for his next film, Knives Out, a crime movie with an impressive cast that includes Daniel Craig and Chris Evans. Star Wars 9 isn't due until the end of this year, which we're already dealing with controversy for the next movie. Star Wars fandom has evolved into an ugly, bizarre thing where fans will stop at nothing to kill the thing they love. Thankfully, Johnson is not dissuaded. Thankfully. Okay, so it's pretty clear where Esquire and this journalist stand on their viewpoints towards where the franchise is going. And they are in support of Rian Johnson and anything that Kennedy Film does that's like it in the future, and in support of his trilogy. Now, we'll know that Kennedy Film continuing Rian Johnson's trilogy would be commercial suicide. So if they're a business that's been run as effectively as they have been so far, then Bob Iger won't allow it. And if he does, then they deserve everything they get. But what it says here is, let me just highlight this one little bit. It talks about Knives Out. Now, why is Knives Out in production at all? Why did he even work on Knives Out if he's supposed to be working on this proposed trilogy of his? Shouldn't he have gone straight into producing that for the first movie to be in theatres 2 years after the release of Episode 9? You know, just to continue the franchise going. Otherwise, what's the plan, you know? What's the next movie in succession going to be? It just goes to show that there's, if that's true, there's absolutely no plan and no control and no direction. It's a directionless boat that they're sailing without a rudder. And they're heading for the rocks. Well, they've actually already been gouged out on some rocks, which they didn't see coming because there's no one steering the boat. And it says, Star Wars fandom has evolved into an ugly, bizarre thing where fans will stop at nothing to kill what they love. Yeah, that's right. There's a reason for that. And that's because they want to see whatever's left of it die so it can be resurrected, so they can have something new.
I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
And something better made by people that have learned from the devastation that's besieged it before. The franchise has been completely ransacked by the people in control, and it needs to be destroyed. It's the only way for people to wake up and see what's wrong and progress onto something new and better. So that's the reason why. And there wouldn't be destruction of the franchise in this particular movie if there wasn't something to destroy it for, and if there wasn't something to complain about. And there obviously is. And this film single-handedly, in one fell swoop, did all of that. It created something for fans to completely rebel against and anarchically attempt to tear down. And if these fans in particular, the ones that are against The Last Jedi and what Kennedy Film and Rian Johnson are doing at the moment, are just a small minority, then how is it getting this much traction? You have to ask, why are so many people taking notice of it if it's just a tiny group of people? If the fandom menace is so small, then why are articles like this being written? And it says the fandom has evolved into an ugly, bizarre thing. So are you talking about the entire fandom, or are you talking about half of the fandom like everyone else says? Oh, it's just half of the fandom. No, it's the majority of the fandom, and this just goes to highlight that. You know, and the fandom menace knows this. They know that they're not in the minority. And they have the high ground too. And we knew what happened to Anakin after Obi-Wan had the high ground, right? It needs to be burnt. It needs to be destroyed for something else and something better to be resurrected in its place and to move the franchise forward. It's the only way. Otherwise, you know, the rot has to be burnt out. And the only way of doing that is destroying it and starting again. Kill this sequel franchise, or at least kill The Last Jedi, and move forward disregarding it forever. Otherwise it will be forever the cancer existing in this franchise, and it's forever going to drag it down and, you know, keep it being dragged through, you know, the excrement filled mud, and it should be flying in the clouds. It should be elevated to, you know, highly regarded sci-fi, not this dreck that we've got with The Last Jedi. And to a further extent, The Force Awakens as well. And it says here, the final line, thankfully, Johnson is not dissuaded. We'll see about that. I've got a sneaking suspicion that he's not going to get his trilogy, and everything he says that he'll be working on in Star Wars is going to be canned. And unless I'm shown evidence to the contrary, and unless Disney declare that his trilogy is still in production, 100% officially, then I won't change my mind. But yeah, the Phantom Menace is the voice is huge, the movement is huge, the number of members are huge, and articles like this just go to highlight exactly how big the Phantom Menace movement is, and how it will not be ignored, and how we will not be silenced, and how much they rely and depend on that big chunk of their fandom too. So that's the article there, guys. Just a quickie, but comment in the space below to let me know what you think, and get hold of me on Twitter as well. I'd love to have a conversation with you. So signing off for now. I'll speak to you guys soon.